I'm going to read to you from Joshua 9, verses 16 to 27. And this is a continuing story of the Gibeonites. And last week I told you about how the Gibeonites had conned Joshua and the people of God. And so this week we're going to talk about the merciful consequences that came from this relationship. It should let you know something about Joshua's character and also about God's mercy. Merciful consequences. It came about at the end of 3 days after they had made a covenant with them that they heard they were neighbors and that they were living within their land. Meaning they had bought this story that they had traveled from far away, and in actuality they were neighbors. And so the people of God were supposed to destroy the people in the land. And so now they had made a covenant with people who they shouldn't have made a covenant with. Why? Because they did not consult God. But had they consulted God, I'll tell you what I believe. I believe that God would have told them to show them mercy. That's what I believe. I believe that it was in God's merciful plan that the Gibeonites would be spared. Then the sons of Israel set out and came to their cities on the third day. Now their cities were Gibeon, and Shapira, and Beeroth, and Kiriath Jearim. The sons of Israel did not strike them because the leaders of the congregation had sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. And the whole congregation grumbled against the leaders. Well, welcome to church politics. Okay? This is just sometimes how it goes. You know, we do the best we can, and we seek the Lord, and you can't keep everybody happy. And some of these folks wanted vengeance on these people, and they weren't too happy when Joshua and the leaders decided to keep their word and to spare them. I'm sure that they consulted God after they remembered that they hadn't consulted God, and now all of a sudden the people don't trust the leaders. And that's the time when they should be trusting them, after they've consulted God about not consulting God. Doesn't that sound interesting, though? But it's how we are. You know, we hear somehow somebody does something and we're never going to trust them again. And there's no mercy, there's no grace in that. It's like people can't change anymore. And we don't trust people when they change. We have a little bit too much information about people in change, probably, to make a real prayerful decision. So they didn't strike them. And so the congregation was upset. And so what Joshua came back and said, but all the leaders said to the whole congregation, we have sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and now we cannot touch them, because we covenanted with them and we've sworn to them. This we will do to them, even let them live, so that the wrath will not be upon us for the oath which we swore to them. The promise of God is so much more important. And so the leader said to them, let them live. So they became hewers of wood and drawers of water for the whole congregation, just as the leaders had spoken to them. Then Joshua called for them and spoke to them, saying, why have you deceived us, saying, we are very far from you, when you were living within our land? Now therefore you're cursed, and you shall never cease being slaves, hewers of wood and drawers of water for the house of my God. So they answered Joshua, and they said, because it was certainly told your servants that the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you all the land, and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land before you. Therefore we feared greatly for our lives because of you, and have done this thing, meaning deceiving you. Now behold, we are in your hands. Do as it seems good and right in your sight to do to us. And thus he did to them, and delivered them from the hands of the sons of Israel, and they did not kill them. But Joshua made them that day hewers of wood and drawers of water for the congregation, for the altar of the Lord, and to this day in the place which he would choose. There are some wonderful life principles that we can learn from this today. Joshua, let's start off with point number 1. Joshua may have been conned, but he was still a man of what? Of his word. And so Joshua, that close, right? Okay. Do I want to move forward? So Joshua may have been, that feels closer, huh? Joshua may have been conned, but he was still a man of his word. That is so important for us to know and to understand. That Joshua may have been conned, but he was still a man of his word. I know that when I get conned, I sometimes can make things even worse. Because then I want retribution. I want justice. I want recourse. You know, I want somebody else to pay the price of my embarrassment. So here poor Joshua is conned, and then after that, he's hated. Pretty rough. Sounds like what Paul went through, right? He was conned and then he was hated. And that's not easy. But Joshua stuck to his guns and his principles. Why? Because it's the Lord. And it's his word. Look at this second point here. If you have sermon notes in front of you. It says, I sometimes struggle with what is right and good when it isn't especially right or good for me. Isn't that interesting? Okay, so when I see something as right and good, okay, I understand that if you make a covenant, you should keep a covenant, and that's right and that's good. But sometimes we want justice somehow to overarch what is right and what is good. What is right, what is good, what is gracious, what is merciful, what is loving, what is according to his word will always overarch our definition of what is right and what is good. You know, we can't live in a tit-for-tat kind of a world. We already do, and it's not working very well. Because if we live in a tit-for-tat world, what's going to happen? It's going to be a tattered world. You know, the old saying is about, we say we want justice, and yet if we were to say, to do for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, you've heard this saying before? What would happen if we really had an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth in this world? It would be a blind, toothless world. Because there would never be enough justice for everybody. And by whose rules? That's why the Word of God and God himself has to be the authority over all of these matters. But I struggle in my life with what is right and good when it isn't especially right or good for me. So if it doesn't work for me, sometimes I can blow it off, even though in principle I would agree. But we have to let those things that are right and are good according to the Word, to have them transcend and overarch what it is that we feel is so important to us. Look at this point number 3. God's people should always try to respond whenever possible with merciful consequences. Whenever possible, we should respond with merciful consequences. How often we make people pay for the smallest things. Here this was this major deception. This whole charade and facade that was created to allow them to get away with making a covenant when there shouldn't have been one made. And then the covenant was honored. Not only should we honor our covenants, but we should let the consequences be merciful when they are not honored. We must honor our covenants and at the same time be merciful with consequences. We know this in marriage, we know this in parenting, we know this in church life, we know this in work. We know that many times it seems like there should be huge consequences, and then there are not. And then we are angry because somebody didn't get it, or they didn't have to pay, or that they weren't further embarrassed. God's people always, that's us, respond, if possible, with merciful consequences. Are you willing to forgive? The Gibeonite people needed to be forgiven. There was a covenant with them, and they needed to honor that. How hard it would be to walk away from somebody that had conned you like that. Like you would say, I can never trust you again. You see, by the power of God, we can experience reconciliation, restoration. We can experience forgiveness, and we can change our perspective of what we think the consequences of people ought to be. I don't want to live in a blind, toothless world. It's already looking, a little wounded. And I think we need to restore some of the virtue of what we really stand for in our role in this world as givers of the gospel and keepers of his peace. Look at this point number 4. Never miss an opportunity when forgiveness can lead to witness. Man, so many times forgiveness can lead to a witness. If we can just forgive somebody, it can touch your heart. It's his mercy that causes us to repent, his kindness, his grace that causes us, to go to our knees sometimes and to feel this difference. When I heard this story about Matthew Ayerga, it just cut me so deeply that this man, and he was the 21st one that was killed. And to watch all of that bloodshed and that mayhem, and then have it come to him. And rather than to protect himself, he did, you say, well, why? That wasn't very merciful to him, but it wasn't about that. It was about him doing what was right. And that is far, far more important. And we need to live by the principle and not so much by the right of things. So much of our world today is talking about our rights. I think we need to talk more about our responsibilities as believers. Let's look at this last point here. When do we have a difficult time forgiving? What is it? I wrote down some of the things for myself. It's hard to forgive. Would you be able to forgive the Gibeonites? Would you always be looking at them as you saw them in your land and as you interfaced with them and as you had relationship with them and saying, I know who you are and I can't trust you because... Remember, it was their leaders that came up with this plan. And isn't that interesting, though? We blame everyone for the actions of one person, that they're associated with that person. I have a difficult time forgiving when I have been betrayed. Is that difficult for you? When you've been betrayed, is it hard to forgive? And do you forgive when you have been betrayed? When we have been betrayed, I want to give you a model I might have shared some months or years ago, but I believe it bears repeating, and that is that if you're having a hard time forgiving someone, you should close your eyes and picture yourself taking those people in your arms and carrying them to the foot of the cross. And you say, well, I can't picture that. They would beat me up. No. In the model of the picture, they're going to surrender and allow you to do that, to take them to Jesus. Would you be willing to take to Jesus the people who have betrayed you? That's what we're being asked to do. In my life, when I have been betrayed, it's when I took people who betrayed me to the Lord. And then He forgave them. I know He did. And so He gives me the power and the faith and the grace and the love and the mercy to forgive. Maybe it's not difficult for you when you've been betrayed because you know you should. Maybe it's harder the second thing that's on the notes here, when I'm made to look bad. If somebody embarrasses you and makes you look bad, is it hard to forgive them and to allow them back into your life or your trust? And I think it happens to all of us. One of the harshest things that was ever said about me, that I'm aware of, okay? One of the harshest things that was ever said about me, and the first time it was said, I just blew it off. I blew it off because, oh, that's one guy's opinion. But the second time it was said about me, it really registered with me. And then there was a third time that it was said about me from 3 totally isolated and different sources, and I realized that I needed to really do some introspection, soul searching about what that said about me. And what was said about me is this, is someone wrote me in a letter and said, I guess I've learned one lesson for sure, that I shouldn't cross Pastor Fred Snyder, because if I do, there'll be a price to pay for it. Ouch. That really, really hurt. First time I got over it though and all that, and then somebody else said something similar some years later, and then some years later somebody else said something similar, and I thought, what is it in that about that? And it said something about my own. And so I was willing to be forgiving, at least to give lip service to that, but I would still say incendiary things about people and kind of send out these secret little missiles of destruction on folks. I think we're all capable of that. Just being a little transparent this morning about something that I have struggled with in my life, about somebody making you look bad, as if that's the most important thing. How is you looking bad more important than a relationship? How is looking bad more important than another human being? How is me looking bad more important than me showing grace and mercy to someone? Maybe it's difficult for you to forgive in this third thing when someone that you love gets hurt. I think a lot of us are a lot more defensive and go into attack mode. You know, kind of like the mother bear syndrome, right? About if you attack my children, I will take you down. And isn't it lovely now that we have the medium of social media? All those things that if we prayed about, we wouldn't do. Now we can just hit a few keys and just do it. It's so easy to do. But if someone we love gets hurt, sometimes it's harder to forgive. Have you ever had this happen to you? Where you take up an offense for someone, and they're already over it, they've forgiven and they've moved on, and you're still acting out in hostility towards someone who's been forgiven. It's not what God would have us do. He took the offense on the cross. And so these Gibeonite people, I'm sure it was not easy at all to have a covenant and to be forgiven, because it probably hurt some people to have those folks in their land. Here's another thing, we just have a couple of more, about I have a difficult time forgiving when I have been wronged in a way that I am strong. I have a hard time forgiving when I am wronged in a way that I am strong. Okay? Just for example, if I am dieting successfully, back up. Okay? Because I become the judge, jury, and persecutor of everybody who isn't. It's like people who may quit smoking, quit drinking, okay, quit whatever it is in your life, and then all of a sudden you become the judge, jury, and persecutor of everybody who is. It's very easy to do. When we're wronged in a way that we're strong. When I have victory over something, I think to myself, well, what's your problem? If I can do it, you can do it. I don't know, that didn't work for me for 40 years, but all of a sudden now, it's the most important principle. When we are wronged in a way that we are strong. But here's the other way. Sometimes we don't forgive when we are wronged in a way that we are weak. When I am wronged in a way that I am weak. So if I have a thing that I guarantee you that if I don't like something in your life, I hate it in my life. There's something about that. And that when we see somebody else pay the price for something that we do, we almost kind of pile on at that point. Because it makes us feel better that people are worse or lesser than we are. So if I have a hard time forgiving when I've been betrayed, that's probably a big trust issue. And the trust issue is between you and God. If you have a hard time forgiving when you're made to look bad, it's probably a pride issue. and you have a pride issue between you and God. And so if it's someone that I love gets hurt and I have a hard time forgiving that, it's maybe a matter of revenge. And I'm a vengeful person. If I'm wronged in a way that I am strong, I probably have an issue with arrogance. Wronged in a way that I am weak and I can't forgive, I probably have an issue with self-protection. We as Christians have a huge opportunity in this world to offer something that nobody's doing. You want to do something unique? Be a peacemaker rather than a divider. Be a peacemaker today. How about reunifying people instead of driving them further apart and polarizing them? How about reconciling people? Didn't Jesus give us the ministry of reconciliation? How about restoring people? No, we say to people, if you cross over this line, I'm done with you and I will never forgive you and I write you out of my life and that's the end of it. That is my final answer. How easily we can go to judgment when we don't have forgiveness in our heart. How about folks who would look for a solution or a remedy? Isn't that a novel concept? So we have conflict, and people want to talk about how they disagree, and they can't find any mutual ground or any compromise whatsoever. There's no civility even to have a conversation. Be an amazing witness in the brokenness of today's world by doing the things that Jesus would have us do. The things that Joshua did, even though the people didn't like it. The things that the leaders stood behind him in. Instead of being about our recourse and retribution, why shouldn't we be about reunification and reconciliation, restoration and remedy? Let's take the words that are really ours and live for those words rather than taking the words that are being forced upon us and somehow being polarized by those. I think folks find it very refreshing when we do our role as peacemakers, when we function as forgivers, when we are people of His Word, when we are folks that don't want tit for tat, and people that aren't so inclined towards justice that we would knock the teeth out of the world or blind the world in the name of a principle. I think if folks are so concerned about an issue, they should probably do something proactive for someone or an individual rather than talking about it. I am sick unto death about all of the talking and no action from people. We are a people of action, but the actions that He would have us take. Next week, Pastor Devin is going to share with us out here. And I'm just going to wait in there. No, I'll be sitting right where he is. But next week, he's going to share with you about when the sunset stood still. Okay? The sea has never stood still. Okay? But the sun has stood still. And he will share with you about what that passage of Scripture means. It's a wonderful, wonderful topic. And I hope that that you're with us again next week. It's been good to be with you today and to share with you these truths today. Would you pray with me?